So welcome back to Kettle Talk for a very special edition of Kettle Talk in a windy Brewster, I guess township or whatever it's called.
We're at Stony Brook Field.
That's exactly at Stony Brook Field, and I'm here with Jim Nowak, who was the PA announcer, started with the Whitecaps in 1990. And I've got to ask you before we go back into the memory bank, can you remember the last time you saw a Brewster team that couldn't complete 9 innings because the bats were so good?
Gosh, honest, I can't. I really can't. It's like anything else. You know from watching your Kettleers, everything depends on pitching in this league. And those that have got the pitching, they're the ones that are going to make out. Example, we had guys that we wanted to come with us this year. We had 8 guys shut down by their coaches. These were all studs. But because the World Series, and whatnot was so long, guys were just shut down and we haven't got them. So.
I'd have to ask, too, since 1990, how have you noticed maybe the difference of the way that players go about playing baseball today? Because in those days, you'd have multiple sport athletes. Over here, a lot of people early on are curtailing themselves just to baseball.
You've got about 99% of the guys in the last 15, 20 years have been just a one sport, And there were guys that I saw back in the early 90s, like, for example, Falmouth Darren Erstad, who ended up playing with the Angels and now the coach in Nebraska. He was also the punter for Nebraska under Tom Osborne. But he's one of the last ones that I actually can remember.
So with that said, too, another couple of guys you remembered, and we were just talking off the air, specifically with the Kettleers, Joe Girardi, Mike Matheny made out pretty well, too. But, watching them play, the times that they would come to Brewster, or even if you saw them in Cotuit or when you did see them, what do you notice about players like that? And do they have something that maybe other players don't that stand out that this guy could be a major leaguer?
It's all mental attitude. Like Mike Matheny, I remember I was with the Harwich Mariners at the time, and I could swear that Matheny was kind of like Thurman Munson, who was my roommate back in '67. You think the guy's going to bite off a nail, all right? And I mean, it's all attitude, all business. The last one, too, back in the early 90s that I can remember that was all business was Jason Varitek, who played for Hyannis. And, of course, like Nomar Garcia Parra was here, and he'd have a thing where he'd always wring his arms and whatnot. And, his Varitek would look at him and say, hey, time is money, get in the box, let's go. And, it's a lot of good stuff like that, but guys that really cared about the game and cared about themselves.
Now, you alluded to him before. A guy that really obviously cared about himself and his team and getting to that step was Thurman Munson. Yeah. What was it like to not only room with him, but you got to see a different Thurman that maybe other people didn't get to see?
Without a doubt. First time I ever met the man, he said, hi, my name is Thurman Munson. And he had a grip that was so tight, but then when he was away from the game, he was relaxed, mellow, and just a sweetheart.
And you also have seen it, obviously being here in New England and in the Boston area too, the rivalry that he had with Carlton Fisk. But we spoke a couple of times too. They were kind of friends too. They had a good kinship with each other.
They did, but the rivalry started here on the Cape.
Okay.
Is that, Thurman was on the plate and Carlton Fisk was playing for Orleans, came in on a suicide squeeze and nailed him in the thigh. And they were kind of like, from there on. And but the thing is, the day that Thurman died in 1979, Carlton Fisk cried. So
I'd have to imagine, too, as the years go on and you see these types of players, too, and we already talked about what made them special and what didn't, but were there maybe some players that you saw that said, you know what, this is the next guy, this is, whichever franchise ends up with him will be special and maybe didn't pan out because of injury or other circumstances?
One guy in particular that Brewster had, it's kind of like, from my perspective, being with the league so long, you get to look for certain things. We had a young man play with us back in '96 and '97, and I nicknamed him Crash. He was a center fielder because of the fact is that he wouldn't care about where he was running. He just had a beat on that ball. Anyways, that young man now has 2 World Series rings, and his name was Aaron Rowan. And also to one in the middle, he got it with, of course, the White Sox in '05 and later on with the Giants, but in between played for the Phillies and got the one of the 10 best web gems with ESPN, breaking his nose, crashing into the center field wall and holding on to the ball,
With that said, too, so now I've got to ask you, and it's always tough to pick one person. So I'm going to give you this, and it's a scenario, and it's of all the players that you've seen. It's the bottom of the ninth, a clean inning. Your team's down one. Who would you want up at the plate in an order?
Without a doubt, Sean Casey.
Okay.
All right. Sweetheart he's slow as molasses, right, running. But the thing is, when he connected, right, he just had that extra edge, and he was a lefty, and of course, being a first baseman, there were many a time when he hit that hit that scored a run in the bottom of the ninth in home, and we won the game, and that put us in the playoffs because of him.
Was he the mayor of the Cape, or did he become the mayor in Cincinnati?
The mayor started here because, if you would, our coach at that time was, let's just say he was a traditionalist. And every time any other opposing player would come to first, whether it be on a walk or hit or whatever, Sean would chat him up. And then when he went back in the dugout, the coach looked at him and said, "What are you, the XYZ mayor of Brewster?" And that's where it started, and it just kept on going in Cincinnati. But actually, he came up with the Indians and hit 400 at Buffalo, and went to the Indians, and he came up in 1998, where he's on his first ups. He had a hit and a ribby, and of course, the first baseman at the time was Jim Tomei, so they weren't going to get rid of him in Cleveland. And it just so happened Mike Hargrove, who was the coach at that time of the Indians, his kid brother was a scout for the Reds. So they had a little bit of bartering, and they took Casey because the Reds needed a first baseman.
Okay, awesome. Well, Jim, thank you for the time. That's Jim Nowak. Always a pleasure. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.